Welcome to another episode of Media Talks TV with your host Tony J. I know it's been a minute, and coming back with another video for the month of Black History Month. So I guess, well, probably about last week we celebrated the 50th anniversary of Good Times, and I know, there's no acknowledgement of it, but I guess I wanted to take this time out on my channel to really acknowledge that Good Times has actually turned 50 years old. And that's monumental in my opinion because Good Times was one of the first black sitcoms to come out of the 70s at a time when there wasn't any sitcoms on TV with a predominant black cast, such as this one. So, it's kind of coming on the heels of, the 50th anniversary is coming on the heels of um, Norman Lear's death. And I wanted to take this time out to really discuss really, really the cultural significance of Good Times in the sense that Good Times was one of those shows that really pushed black culture into the stratosphere in the 70s. And any other, there wasn't really any other TV show out during that time in 1974. Um, we could talk about, you know, all of All in the Family. We could talk about the Jeffersons, but the one TV show that really set the standard for black television was Good Times. And the reason why it's more impactful, I would say it's more impactful than the Cosby Show, is because of its connections to black life. I wasn't born in the 70s, but when I was younger, I've maybe watched several episodes of Good Times. I didn't start watching Good Times until 2004, so I was about like 14 years old. But they still came on TV as really reruns. So I didn't have a issue in terms of, well, me trying to understand why Good Times was such an amazing show, but also understanding, you know, most people when, most black people, when you think about any black television show, it was always Good Times that really set the standard. Even I still hear in barbershops, even today, who was the best black father on TV? They'll say, "Oh yeah, James Evans, cause James Evans was my daddy." You hear black folks talk about that all the time. You hear it in barbershops. I heard, oh, I had one of those fathers because them fathers don't play. So yeah, if it came down, one of the best black TV fathers had to be James Evans, had to be John Amos. So when people say and talk about Good Times, they always talk about John Amos being the standard. There was a time when Good Times was starting, of course, and I know many of you heard this story before, but the Esther Rolls of course, the actress that played Florida Evans, she wanted a black father on television. And she said to Norman Lear that she would not do the show unless you gave me a husband. And she would not renege on that negotiation. So they found John Amos. John Amos and both Esther Rose worked in the African American Ensemble Theater in Chicago. They were a part of that. And when they transitioned to television, you know, there was not really a vision about Black America on television before the 1970s. The vision of Black America on television was Amos and Andy, which was cringeworthy. Um, and after that, Flip Wilson. But then when we had Good Times, it was like, okay, this is a reflection of what Black America in its current state looks like. So it looked like the Evans family living in the projects. I never really understood why it took place in Chicago as opposed to any other place. Like, you know, I would have had it taken place in maybe New York or Los Angeles because that's where a lot of black folks were moving to. I mean, Chicago was one thing, but in reality, maybe Chicago was the standard for black families back then because of the Great Migration. So maybe I assume, Norman Lear in certain respects maybe set the had the setting in the environment in Chicago because that's what black families look like. That's what he assumed looked like. But we also can't forget that this is also um Good Times is also Monty Ross's uh vision for Norman Lear. So we can't really forget that Monty Ross um made that show what it was. He was the visionary behind it, and even though he does not get enough credit, Monty Ross is the man who envisioned Good Times. And many black shows as well in the 70s. Um and Chicago was really the standard point for black for black Americans because for the simple fact is, blacks were living in Chicago. There was a large amount of blacks living in Chicago at the time. So it was just the standard. Cabrini Green was one of the largest public housing complexes in Chicago at the time of shooting Good Times. So there was just this vision around that really catapulted Good Times into the black television show that it is. And although a lot of people have complaints about the removal of John Amos as James Evans, I think he fared out pretty well because after he finished with that show, he went on to do play an older Kunta Kinte on Roots in 1977. So I think everybody landed well on their feet. Some of the cast members are still living besides I think Keith Powers is gone, and the man that played Bookman, he passed away, more than 2 years ago. He was about 86 years old. So, you know, all the people that made that show what it was, and of course, I can't forget um the woman that played Willona, I forgot her name, but you forgive me if I forget her name, but she played Willona. She died 3 years ago. So the standing cast members is JJ, Michael, and Thelma. They're still alive. They're the last three standing. Almost everybody from the Jeffersons is gone, besides maybe Belinda Tolbert and Mike Evans. No, Mike Evans passed away. Damon Evans is still around. So, when once a show reaches its pinnacle of 50 years, it's just amazing the lasting value that show has. I will say that, you know, um Good Times was one of the first black shows to deal with serious issues as well. We can't remiss that. Talking about politics and the corruption of Chicago politics and I believe it was Alderman Davis and a lot of stuff that people don't really dialogue about. Also was one of the first shows to actually talk about sexually transmitted diseases. It was the VD episode when JJ caught the VD, you know. So, when I think about that show, it set a standard. And also, we can't forget that it it helped Janet Jackson build a foundation for her career because then she went on to do Different Strokes and then jump into the music career by the time the 80s got here. So it that show really helped a lot of people coming through Hollywood. And although some people didn't agree with it, people made, I believe there was a story one time I heard that the Black Panthers didn't like the show because they assumed that all blacks were living in the ghetto. And I think Norman Lear got a letter from the Black Panther organization, and they didn't like how blacks were viewed on television as being in the ghetto and downtrodden. So that their response, Norman Lear's response to that letter, was to make the Jeffersons, and that's how we got Jeffersons. That's how we got What's Happening and all these other shows where Hollywood was really giving blacks a chance to really push their culture on television. And it's only been a 50 years from where we stand. It's not long ago, but it's a long time. It's 5 generations removed from a time period that where blacks were trying to get a footing into white America, in a time period where blacks were grappling with the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And to see a show like Good Times on television, it broke racial barriers because people got to see the dialogue between Good Times, All in the Family, and the Jeffersons, and then have that dialogue on television where they're talking about serious issues. It was a beautiful thing in the 70s for the previous generation, not my generation, because of course, my generation, we had Family Matters. So I was around for that. I was not around for Good Times. I hate to say it, but yeah, was not around for Good Times. But the beauty of that show is it made black people acknowledged in the white world. And that's what's so amazing about that show. in 50 years now, people have black people still hold a connection to good times. And it hasn't gone anywhere. People still watch the reruns, people still watch the show. Of course, one of my favorite episodes was Black Jesus. That was my favorite. That was my favorite episode. I think it was the second episode of the first season. And the Black Jesus episode was one of my favorite because um at the end of it they found out that the picture wasn't of Jesus, it was Ned DeWano. That was kind of funny. That was actually one of the most hilarious episodes I had ever watched on TV, and it's still a laughable episode even to this day. I still get chuckles out of that episode because what black family has not gone through that? The little nuances about Jesus being black or white. So, I would say, happy 50th anniversary to Good Times. And, it's really a celebration of black culture and black history to be the standard bearer of black television in the 70s. So for that, I would like to take this episode to acknowledge the 50th anniversary of Good Times. And I will continue to love and watch Good Times for as long as I'm living.